They look like your daughter, your sister, your neighbor's kid. Prom photos, graduation pictures, family portraits, the faces of typical American teenagers with their whole lives ahead of them. Cut to prison cells, orange jumpsuits, life sentences. But these teenage girls are serving life sentences for murder. Welcome to Savage Case Files, where we expose the most shocking betrayals, brutal crimes, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Today's episode, the complete list of teenage girls currently in prison for murder in the United States. Female juvenile murderers are among the rarest criminals in America. While teenage boys commit the vast majority of violent crimes, girls who kill represent a statistical anomaly that shocks law enforcement and communities alike. As of 2025, only 3 teenage girls remain in U.S. prisons serving life sentences for murder, 3 cases that shattered the myth that girls don't kill. The youngest was just 14 when she committed murder. All 3 were under 18 when they took lives. All 3 will likely die in prison for crimes committed as children. From a daughter who murdered her own mother to a teenager who killed for the thrill of it, from best friends who became killers to a child who planned family annihilation, we'll examine how teenage girls become murderers and what justice looks like for juvenile killers. Juvenile life sentences without parole represent the most controversial punishment in America. Supreme Court rulings have changed everything for young killers, yet these 3 cases survived every legal challenge. The question that haunts every case: can a child be irredeemable? 3 cases, 3 teenage girls, 3 life sentences that may never end. Case by case, we'll reveal how children become killers and why society locks them away forever. Female teenage murderers represent less than 5% of all juvenile homicide cases in America. When girls kill, it defies every statistical expectation and social assumption about gender and violence. These cases are so rare that each one becomes a landmark in criminal justice. The legal landscape for juvenile killers changed dramatically with 2 Supreme Court decisions. Graham v. Florida in 2010 banned life without parole for juveniles convicted of non-homicide crimes. Miller v. Alabama in 2012 struck down mandatory life sentences for juveniles, ruling that children are fundamentally different from adults and deserve individualized sentencing. The Supreme Court recognized that juvenile brains are still developing, particularly in areas controlling impulse and decision-making. Children are more susceptible to peer pressure, family dysfunction, and rehabilitation. These rulings forced states to reconsider how they punish their youngest killers. Some states responded by banning juvenile life without parole entirely. Others found legal workarounds, creating sentences that effectively keep children in prison for life while technically offering distant parole possibilities. The result is a patchwork of laws that treat similar crimes differently depending on geography. These 3 girls represent the survivors of this legal evolution. Their cases were deemed so heinous that courts found ways to impose effective life sentences despite Supreme Court protections. Different states, different approaches, but the same result: children who will likely never see freedom. The debate continues to rage between rehabilitation and punishment. Victims' families demand justice and closure, arguing that some crimes are too evil to forgive, regardless of the perpetrator's age. Defendants' families fight for second chances, insisting that children can change and deserve the opportunity to prove their redemption. Every case pits one family's grief against another family's hope. The question remains: can a 14-year-old who commits murder ever truly be rehabilitated, or are some children simply born evil? These 3 teenage girls will likely spend the rest of their lives answering that question from behind prison walls. Case 1, Carly Gregg. Carly Gregg was 14 years old, living what appeared to be a normal teenage life in Mississippi. She attended school, had friends, and lived with her mother, Ashley Smiley, and stepfather, Heath Smiley, in a middle-class home. There were no obvious warning signs, no history of violence, nothing that would suggest the horror that was about to unfold. March 19, 2024. Started like any other day for the Greg Smiley family, but by evening, their world would be destroyed forever by the actions of the youngest member of their household. That afternoon, Carly made a decision that would end her childhood and her mother's life.
All right, now to this disturbing murder out of Mississippi. 15-year-old Carly Gregg has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for killing her mother and trying to kill her stepfather.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Carly Madison Gregg, guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment.
She retrieved a firearm and shot her mother, Ashley Smiley, multiple times, killing her instantly. When her stepfather, Heath, returned home, Carly attempted to kill him as well, but Heath managed to survive the attack. The crime scene that greeted first responders was devastating. A 14-year-old girl had turned her family home into a murder scene, killing the woman who had given her life and trying to eliminate the man who had helped raise her. Heath Smiley, wounded but alive, became the key witness against his stepdaughter. His testimony would paint a picture of a child who had committed an unthinkable act of family violence without apparent provocation or explanation. The investigation struggled to find a clear motive. This wasn't a case of abuse, financial stress, or family dysfunction. It appeared to be a motiveless crime committed by a child against the people who loved her most. Mississippi prosecutors made the decision to charge Carly as an adult, despite her age. The state argued that the severity of the crime, matricide and attempted murder, warranted adult consequences regardless of the perpetrator's youth. During her trial, Carly's defense team argued for leniency based on her age and brain development. They presented evidence about juvenile psychology and the capacity for rehabilitation. But the prosecution countered with the brutality of the crime and the need for justice. The jury found Carly guilty on all charges. At just 15 years old, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, making her one of the youngest people in America serving such a sentence. Case 2. Alyssa Bamante. Alyssa Bamante was 15 years old in 2009, living in Missouri with a history that hinted at the darkness within. She had struggled with depression and self-harm, bouncing through foster care and family instability. But nothing in her troubled background prepared anyone for what she would do to an innocent 9-year-old neighbor. Elizabeth Olton was everything Alyssa wasn't, a happy, trusting child who lived nearby and looked up to her teenage neighbor. On October 21, 2009, Elizabeth's trust would prove fatal when Alyssa lured her into the woods with a simple invitation to play. What happened next shocked even experienced investigators. Alyssa strangled and stabbed the 9-year-old child, then buried her body in a shallow grave she had dug earlier. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of rage. It was premeditated murder, committed for the most chilling reason possible. Alyssa's own diary entries revealed the horrifying truth about her motivations. She wrote, "It was amazing. As soon as you get over the 'oh my God, I can't do this' feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I kind of like the sound of it. Amazing." She had killed Elizabeth Olin simply to experience what murder felt like. When Elizabeth was reported missing, the entire community joined the search effort. Alyssa participated in the search, helping look for the child she had murdered, showing no signs of guilt or remorse as families combed the woods calling Elizabeth's name. The investigation eventually led to Alyssa when inconsistencies in her story raised suspicions. When confronted with evidence, she confessed to the murder with disturbing casualness, admitting she had killed Elizabeth just to see what it would feel like to take a life. Missouri prosecutors charged Alyssa as an adult, seeking the harshest possible sentence for the teenage killer. She eventually accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. But in 2024, new Missouri legislation effectively eliminated Alyssa's parole eligibility, turning her sentence into life without parole. After more than 15 years in adult prison, Alyssa Bamante remains one of Missouri's most notorious juvenile killers, serving what is now an effective life sentence for a crime she committed as a teenager. Case 3. Shelia Eddie. Shelia Eddie, Rachel Schoaf, and Skylar Neese had been best friends since childhood in West Virginia. They shared secrets, sleepovers, and the typical bonds of teenage friendship. But beneath the surface of their relationship, jealousy and resentment were building toward a deadly conclusion. Skylar Neese was 16 years old, an honor student beloved by her family and friends. She trusted Shelia and Rachel completely, never suspecting that her best friends were planning her murder. On July 6, 2012, Shelia and Rachel convinced Skylar to sneak out of her house for a late-night drive. They told her they were going to get high and have fun, a typical teenage adventure. Instead, they drove her to a remote area in Pennsylvania where they had planned to kill her. When they reached the isolated woods, Shelia and Rachel turned on their best friend. As they attacked her with knives, Skylar's last word was a heartbreaking question. Why? She died not understanding why the people she trusted most had betrayed her so completely. The motive, when it was finally revealed, was as shocking as the crime itself. Shelia and Rachel had been in a secret romantic relationship, and they feared that Skylar would expose their secret. Rather than risk their relationship being discovered, they decided to eliminate the threat by murdering their best friend. After killing Skylar, the two girls returned home and began an elaborate cover-up. They helped search for their missing friend, posted concerned messages on social media, and comforted Skylar's devastated parents. For months, they maintained the charade while Skylar's body decomposed in the Pennsylvania woods. The investigation eventually focused on inconsistencies in the girls' stories. Rachel Schoaf broke first, confessing to the murder and revealing the shocking truth. "We just didn't want to be friends with her anymore." Rachel's confession led police to Skylar's remains and implicated Shelia Eddie as the co-conspirator. While Rachel cooperated with authorities, Shelia maintained her innocence until overwhelming evidence forced her to accept a plea deal. Both girls were charged as adults. Shelia received a life sentence with eligibility for parole after 15 years under West Virginia law. She remains incarcerated and could potentially be released while still in her 30s. The Neese family channeled their grief into advocacy, successfully pushing for Skylar's Law, which requires faster response times for missing teenager cases. 3 teenage girls, 3 life sentences, 3 different paths through America's complex juvenile justice system. Carly Gregg serves life without parole at just 15 years old. Alyssa Bamante faces an effective life sentence due to recent law changes in Missouri. Shelia Eddie remains eligible for parole after serving 15 years, potentially gaining freedom while still in her 30s. These cases represent the harshest juvenile sentences still standing in America, each surviving legal challenges that have freed other young killers. Different states have taken vastly different approaches to juvenile murder, creating a system where geography can determine whether a child serves 10 years or dies in prison. The question of rehabilitation haunts every decision. Can teenage killers be reformed, or are some children simply beyond redemption? Success stories exist. Former juvenile murderers who have been released and become productive citizens. But recidivism rates and the severity of these particular crimes make rehabilitation seem impossible to many. Life in adult prison presents unique challenges for teenage girls. They must navigate dangerous environments while their brains are still developing. Educational programs, therapy, and basic safety become daily struggles in facilities designed for adult criminals, not children. The families on both sides continue to suffer. Victims' families seek justice and closure, often opposing any possibility of release for their loved ones' killers. Defendants' families hope for redemption and second chances, watching their children grow up behind bars for crimes committed in adolescence. Each case has influenced juvenile justice policy. Carly's case sparked debates about charging 14-year-olds as adults. Alyssa's situation highlighted how changing laws can retroactively affect sentences. Shelia's case demonstrated how co-conspirators can receive vastly different punishments based on cooperation. The future remains uncertain for all three. Legal challenges continue, public opinion shifts, and new research emerges about juvenile brain development. Some may eventually see their sentences modified, while others will likely spend their entire lives paying for crimes they committed as children. These three girls represent the extreme edge of juvenile justice. Cases so severe that society has decided childhood itself cannot excuse their actions. Three teenage girls serving effective life sentences for crimes that shocked America. Carly Gregg, who killed her mother at 14 and now faces life without parole. Alyssa Bamante, who murdered a 9-year-old neighbor for the thrill and remains imprisoned after 15 years. Shelia Eddie, who betrayed her best friend in the most ultimate way and could potentially see freedom again. These are the youngest female killers in American prisons, representing the most controversial sentences in juvenile justice. Should children who commit murder serve life sentences, or does their age demand a different approach to justice? Can a 14-year-old truly be beyond redemption, or do we owe every child the chance to change and grow? Which case shocked you the most? The daughter who killed her mother, the teenager who murdered for excitement, or the best friends who turned deadly? The debate over juvenile life sentences continues to divide America. Some argue that certain crimes are so heinous that age becomes irrelevant, that murder demands the ultimate punishment regardless of who commits it. Others insist that children's brains are still developing, that rehabilitation should always be possible, and that condemning teenagers to die in prison violates our most basic principles about childhood and redemption. Remember Ashley Smiley, killed by her own daughter in their family home. Remember 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton, murdered by a neighbor who wanted to experience killing. Remember Skylar Neese, betrayed and killed by the friends she trusted most. Their families continue seeking justice and meaning from these senseless losses. These cases continue to shape how America treats its youngest killers, influencing laws, court decisions, and public opinion about the limits of mercy and the possibility of redemption. This has been Savage Case Files, examining the darkest corners of juvenile crime and the complex questions they raise about justice, punishment, and the nature of evil itself. Subscribe for more cases that challenge our understanding of crime and consequence. 3 teenage girls crossed the line from childhood to murder. 3 families destroyed by violence and betrayal. The question remains, what do we do with children who kill?